Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us last session. We are going to be talking about the inclusion of disability on TV as well as the media space, the movies. I'll start with the introductions. On my right is Shakila Maharaj. She's an entrepreneur, innovator, global disability strategist. She's also on the presidential working group on disability and the MD of ShazaCin, Accessible Media. Welcome, Shakila.
Thank you.
Karen Jeynes, head writer and producer for Boardwalk Pictures. She has written a number of award-winning shows, and she's studying for her PhD with the University of Pretoria, doing disability representation, focusing on autism representation on TV. Welcome, Karen. Last but not least, Nenio Mbazima. Nenio is a film producer and director. He works with the VETS Center for Deaf Studies. He started his gig on Deaf Television, which was on SABC3, and he's an award-winning author and CEO of Strongwind, which is a South African sign language media company that focuses on videos that teach people sign language. Welcome, Nenio. I'm Simon Manda. I'm the editor of THISABILITY newspaper. We do disability awareness, focusing on the mainstreaming, inclusion and access for socio-economic inclusion for persons with disabilities. And we're going to talk about the discourse of media and disability intersectionality. To start with, we're going to look at the 5 pillars that we're going to focus on. The first one being, why is there a need to include disability in the media space? The global economy has about 7 billion people. And on average, the United Nations estimates that 10% of that population is people with disabilities. A large diversity market of almost 700 million people. But most of them are excluded from participation because of barriers that exist. And we're going to be tackling and talking about some of those barriers. The focus that we need to have is what happens behind the camera as far as inclusion is involved, what happens in front of the camera, as well as growing a reach or a market, the market access for people with disabilities to attend movies, to attend and hear or see themselves on the media platforms. There's quite a limited representation, and each one of you, Nenio, Karen, and Shakila, why do you think there is such a limited representation for people with disabilities? I'll start with you, Shakila.
So, the reason, well, there are several reasons, but I think the glaring one is lack of accessibility. We live in a world that's not designed for us. And by that I mean the world is designed for persons with 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 legs. So if you deviate in any way, then you're living like a round peg in a square hole. You have to adapt to a world that's not designed, as I said. So consequently, representation across different sectors, especially within film, whether it's the set, whether it's getting educated in the industry. Can I still be heard? Can I still be heard?
Yes.
So whether you want to acquire a qualification and skills in this area so that you can cultivate your talent, there's barriers to access to education because it's not designed to facilitate the inclusion of persons with different disabilities within that space. when you get into the industry and you want to work in that space, the industry itself is not designed, from attitude to the actual physical access to equipment to software. And then when you finally make your way through that and you want to actually either act or be a cameraman, or whether you want to perform as an actor, you again face barriers. I think the ultimate barrier is attitude. As long as you've got persons without disabilities who believe you can't do something, then that is the major barrier that restricts you from doing it. So if you want to enter into this space, you got to be prepared to break through all those barriers.
You talk about lack of physical access. We know that there is physical disabilities and invisible disabilities. I'm going to turn to you, Karen. Would you explain or maybe talk about unlimited access or limited access as far as neurodiversity is involved?
Absolutely. And I'm going to start by agreeing with my colleague. I think all of it begins with who is at the top and who is making decisions about the content that is being made. And I think as an industry in South Africa, we've dealt with issues around, we know that there's not enough gender representation, we've dealt with issues around racial representation, and in terms of diversity representation, disability representation is lost to the table. And in South Africa, we're really lagging behind the rest of the world. Neurodiversity and there's other invisible disabilities. If we do see them in this country, we're seeing foreign representations of them. We're seeing little white autistic boys on the street, and we're not recognizing that this is part of our own country, this is part of our own people in this country. It's all the same issues. In this industry, we need to be pushing, we need to market ourselves, we need to get out there. For a lot of people who are autistic, who have other neurodiverse issues, it's an incredibly difficult thing to do. I'm autistic. I'm here pitching a film that my son and I wrote. My son is autistic. He's OCD. He has any number of issues. He can't be in this space with this many people. That in itself is far too much for him. It's completely inaccessible. So this kind of opportunity, this kind of market, it's not made for someone like him. And there's so many people, again, as much as there's physical accessibility needs, and we saw a demonstration just now of somebody unfortunately getting in the way of our sign language interpreter here. There's physical needs, but there's also all these other kinds of needs that we don't necessarily see for people with neurodiversity that again just prevents us from getting in the room in the first place to make sure the stories are being told, because the people in the room decide which stories are being told.
I'll turn to Nenio. We're talking about limited representation and the lack of awareness. South Africa has just witnessed the adoption of the South African Sign Language as the 12th language. What does it say to accessibility and representation as a filmmaker?
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Simon. So hi to everybody. Look, we deaf people all have sign names, okay? So I just wanted to share mine. The deaf community in Johannesburg, they call Simon like that because he's built like a beast. It's like, So that's his sign name, Simon. I like it a lot. Thanks, Simon. Sorry. So I was born here, and while I was growing up, I used to enjoy music a lot. I could hear the TV, but I then became deaf, and that was that. Now I am profusely deaf. First I was angry. When I became deaf, I was very angry, but now I'm a happy man. Look at me, I'm a deaf happy man, right? So when I wake up, if I was to wake up hearing again, I'd be mad. I want to go back to being deaf. So if somebody would invite me to church and say, look, I want to pray for you to become hearing, I'd say, no, thank you. I'm deaf. I'm happy being deaf. And that's it. But the world is created for hearing people. And the hearing people are the ones that sit in the boardrooms and make the plannings. And they make sure that deaf people have no access whatsoever. They cut us out. Like when you're planning for the media, you need to involve the deaf community. Sorry, I'm not excluding the other disabilities. I'm representing the deaf at the moment, so I'm just focusing on deaf, okay? And because I'm part of the deaf community. You need to involve the deaf community, and that doesn't happen. So if, let's say, it happens that the TV has a person who is signing, the deaf community starts complaining. Okay, sorry, so let's say if TV was full of just deaf people, hearing people would start complaining and say, why is it only deaf people? Why aren't there any hearing people? Right? But now it's the hearing people that make, that plan. The producer is a hearing person, right? But imagine if the crew was deaf, and so the producer could be hearing, but then the actor could be deaf, and so forth. It would open the minds of so many people, and they would realize that deaf people can do things. This morning when I flew in, I'm deaf, right? And they called for people to come and board the plane. So they make the announcement by a voice. I put it here. Somebody had to come and literally take my hand and guide me. And I said, no, I will find my way. You don't have to pull me around. I want to be independent, right? So then I had to walk alone. But imagine in the airport if there was a TV there that was making that had captions and announcements for us to see, how much accessibility we'd have. You'd be able to see the different things that deaf people can do. We actually can do a lot, but it's just a communication barrier. So a deaf person doesn't need physical guidance. We don't need you to walk us in the airport or anywhere else in public. We just need to communicate. The barrier is communication. So perhaps if people started learning basic sign language, that could be the first step to start including us. There are so many barriers. In fact, the barriers are too much, but I hope one day I will have the opportunity to just pull my guts out to South Africa and explain to you clearly what all the barriers are, the works that deaf people can do. We need to try to communicate in sign language. That's our first language, right? I know there are concerns about how does one communicate with deaf people, Sign language interpreters are expensive, we know, right? But what happens if there's no interpreter? We don't always need to rely on interpreters, right? Even in the workplace, we don't need an interpreter there every day. We just need to understand what is required for us at work, and then we do our work. No interpreter. You only call an interpreter in the workplace if there's a meeting. So that's how you can start getting rid of the barriers.
Thanks for that, Nenio. I was going to touch on the second point that says the movement that we are trying to build is the one that promotes inclusive content creation. And when it comes to inclusiveness and making the right content, there's a need for consultation. But somehow, when somebody is making a movie, they don't consider that. So Shakila, I want you to articulate from an audio participation viewpoint that you focus on how important is consultation for representation? For instance, there is an argument that says, if you are saying a character is being portrayed on TV, why is it wrong for somebody without a disability to represent a person with a disability? Because they are acting in any case. So what's the argument? What do you think?
So we were having this discussion and the disability movement is pushing for that persons with disabilities should perform the roles that they are supposed to be portraying. So if I'm portraying the role of a person who is blind, we should then ensure that the actor or actress is a blind person rather than giving it to a sighted person. Well, I'm of two views, right? Ideally, if there are blind persons talented to perform that role, then they should compete no differently with sighted persons to perform it, because my position is it's about talent. It's not about affirmative placement of the person in the role to perform that role. So that's where you and I had a little bit of a difference. I'm not sure if it was a difference. I do believe, though, on the one hand, that persons with disabilities may not get the same opportunity to accessing the kinds of jobs that they would like to get into in acting or scripting or whatever. And in that case, that we should be cognizant of it. But I don't feel that just because I'm blind, I should be performing only blind roles and be typecasted into that. Are you with me?
Yes, I'm with you. That brings me to Karen. I know you've written a number of dramas, you've written a lot of content. Would you give maybe your journey on inclusion of persons with disabilities as somebody that you've cast in your stories and how that was in inclusion?
Absolutely. You know, I think for me, content creation starts in the writing room, in the creative correspondence, in the pitching room, and then in the writing room. And I think for me, it's so important that if you are writing characters with disabilities, then somebody in your creative team needs to have really close personal knowledge of that, to be a person with that disability or to be very closely connected with that. And if you don't have that person in your room, you need to find them. You need to find consultants. That's a big part of what Simon and I are wanting to do beyond this, that we're wanting to talk to a lot of you about, is we're building databases, because we're saying these people are here, these people exist, and it's about time that, you know, if you see somebody on TV, you need somebody who's able to bring the truth of that disability to life, and that starts in the writing process. You know, it's really easy, actually, to be inclusive. It really is. And again, I go back to we've done this around racism. We're doing this, of course. It's a constant process around race and around gender. But what we know is, again, if our audience, if we're making a tampon advert, we don't want to represent design and create and write the tampon advert. We know this now. And so we know if we're writing a story with a blind character that's central to it, we don't write it without talking to and including and involving blind people in the creative process. That just doesn't make any sense. It's just not logical. And for me, as a writer, as a creative, it makes for better content. The more voices we have in the room, the more perspectives we hear from, the more exciting and interesting our content becomes. I've experienced this with writers' rooms. You know, if you've got a lot of people who are very similar, they have similar ideas, they have similar references, they have similar life experience. But if you've got a lot of very different people, they're going to bring a whole lot of new things to the room with you. When it comes to acting and performance, I think there's lots of conversations to be had. I think that first of all, actors with disabilities shouldn't be limited to roles that are disabled characters. And we know that so often characters with disabilities are smaller characters, or characters we're meant to feel sorry for. You know, they're not given fun action stories or Dare to Fall in Love or whatever else. That's a big part of what we need to shift and what we need to change. That absolutely, wherever we can, we should be hiring actors with a disability to play the characters with a disability. And our very basic bottom line should be otherwise, we need a consultant on set who is a person with that disability, who is there at every moment of that journey to help bring that truth to that portrayal.
Yes.
I agree entirely with Karen, and that it's critical to consult with persons with that particular disability if you're going to be projecting a character type with that disability to make sure that it's authentic. I also want to mention from an audio description perspective, which you find typical now and always has been the case, is that you don't consult with the visually impaired community in structuring a film at the creation stage to accommodate description. Description is an afterthought, and consequently you're forced to develop the accessibility of a film within the limited space that directors create between dialogue, when right up front, if you consult with the blindness sector or authorities on description, you would factor that in right at the very beginning when you are directing a film, ensuring that you're allowing appropriate spacing for important storylines and plots that are visual based.
Thank you for that, Shakila. And we know that when we talk about access, there's now assistive technology that actually helps, in developing movies where you, like for instance, audio description. We can use accessible websites. We can use accessible venues. We can use subtitling and closed captioning. Nenio, closed captioning versus signing. What would be the best way to reach deaf audiences?
Alright, for deaf people, signing is always the best. But I do understand that on TV, sometimes it's not possible that when an actor is there, there's an interpreter in the corner trying to catch up with everything that the actors are doing. Yes, the deaf people would enjoy that the most if there was a sign language interpreter in all movies, but I know that hearing people hate it. So that's why subtitling will then do in that, or closed captioning will do in that. But it also helps if the language is also different, If there's a different language being spoken, then closed captioning helps. So, same as sign language is a different language, closed captioning really helps. But remember, sign language, the structure of sign language is completely different from a spoken language. So the closed captioning structure is always English structure. But at least it provides a little bit of access for deaf people. But I know that we still have a long way to go. Look, we do have hearing, in terms of deaf actors, we need more of those. We do have hearing people who know sign language that can sign. Yeah? But also, when they are okay, so regarding the 5 points, in terms of the actor who is hearing but is acting in sign language, they need to understand all the 5 important elements of sign language and portray it very perfectly. I understand that we also need funding. We need funding that needs to be focused into the project of getting deaf people more involved, right? Because sometimes we get an actor who needs to come, they need to plan, they need to stay in a hotel, they need to be filmed, they need to do all that, and then people really start to complain about the costs. And also we need to understand that when you are acting, sometimes you spend months and months and months away from your family. So those are a lot of things also that deaf people need to understand in terms of understanding the work that is required to create a film. especially if you want to be involved. And also, I think there is space for collaboration. You could have a deaf person and a hearing person on set that are there together and all the time, right? But for now, as deaf people, we accept subtitling. We don't enjoy it fully, but we know it's a little bit of access for us. And also, what's not nice about it is that you have to look at the actors and then the words at the same time. So you're looking up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. So it would be best to have a sign language interpreter, but for now, this is what we accept. Okay, Simon. So hopefully next year I'll be the president. Since sign language is approved, I'll be the president next year, and I'll make sure everything on TV has interpreters.
In South Africa, there's an affirmative action that has been targeted for the labor practices, and the disability quota is 7%. How far is that important in the policy, the need for policy change and legislation, and how can we ensure that this is enforced from the media, from the entertainment viewpoint? Shakila.
Wow, you could target me. So how do we enforce it?
Yes, to enforce that the practice is adopted in
Well, can I tell you, that's set for government. That particular target of 7% is set for government to achieve. So the previous target was 2% and they haven't achieved that. So how achievable the 7% is going to be is another story. But how do we enforce it? I think enforce it is all about monitoring and evaluation, because every ministry is meant to achieve that target, and you measure performance by indicators within government, and they also get assessed by auditor generals. So if the disability sector themselves do not understand that process and are not informed on how it works within government, we then don't know how to ensure government is held accountable. Our big challenge in South Africa is holding government accountable to achieve the targets they set. So right now, our laws are like the Rolls Royce, but we're actually riding a bicycle. So to come back then, the disability sector, and being part of the presidential working group, we have reduced it to one major need, and that is we need a Disability Act in South Africa. Every country that has a Disability Act, and starting with the USA, the ADA, for example, the Americans with Disability Act, it has held governments accountable for the achievement of inclusion. And what it's done is that it's allowed for litigation. And I know litigation isn't a great thing, but enforcement can only come about if you litigate and hold not only government and corporates as well. Very recently we had India introducing a Disability Act, and India is moving at a pace. What the USA achieved over decades, India is achieving within years. Because they've got a Disability Act, the disability sector is litigating and holding them accountable to implementation. So consequently, you're getting the minimum percentages being achieved in employment, minimum percentages being achieved in representation within the film sector. So that's basically what's bringing it about.
Karen and I, we are in touch with some colleagues in Hollywood who are doing the good practices, including disability. And we also have colleagues in the academia in the UK. One of those colleagues have developed a toolkit. I want to move away from the litigation and look at maybe a toolkit that can be adopted. Karen, do you think how enforceable would that be in application in South Africa and Africa?
So I think this is an interesting question. I'm going to start by going, we look at who's here at this talk, and I feel like most people are here or already a little bit invested in disability representation. This is always the way it is. there are going to be some people in the industry who care about this because they personally care about it. But the only way you achieve big systemic change is if our government departments, our funders, and our broadcasters care about it. That is the only way you're going to get the industry to care about it. If the broadcasters say we need to see this many people with disabilities, we need to see stories centering people with disabilities, then the producers are going to make those stories. If the funders say that in order to access our funding, you need to have accessible sets, you need to include audio description, you need to include closed captions and subtitles. If those things are in place, then the industry will make it happen. And again, I go, this is where South Africa lags behind. We're already, as a company, we have signed a deal where one of our tech specs is delivering audio description. That's an international broadcaster who is asking us for that. South African broadcasters are not asking us for it. Because they ask for it, it's in the contract, we have to budget for it, we have to make it happen. Then it's easy, then it happens. That's how you enforce it. You can charge the money. So the first thing we need is we need research, we need facts. The facts are there for the US, the facts are there for the UK. What we don't have is a real understanding of disability representation, of disability inclusion, of our industry. We have a sense and we have personal knowledge, but it would be wonderful to have a real survey of that. And then we need to move towards best practice through the toolkit. The people at Sundance, ever since they wrote out Camp, have also been working on a lot of ways to make the industry more accessible. There's a lot of best practice out there in the world that we need to bring to South Africa, but those big policy players, funders, broadcasters, they're the ones who need to say, this must happen. And that is the way you enforce it through request.
So you suggest going in the office level and having the buy-in from there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We started this by saying there's a huge market. In Africa, there's around 80 million people with disabilities on our continent. There's a huge market for this. There needs to be buy-in from the top of saying we need representation, we need accessibility, we need inclusion, and we are going to demand this on our screens, we're going to demand this in our funding policies, and then the industry will follow.
I don't know if there are any funders in this auditorium, but when you look at funding, which is the basis of starting any project, you realize that funders come short when they say, oh, nobody with a disability is applying. You find it in grants or the expectations in scholarships and stuff. But you realize that there's a whole value chain in an approach that's being done, that's not being done. First and foremost, there are professionals with disabilities that are already in the industry. Then there's that part, that group, that needs assistance in terms of getting to learnerships, getting bursaries, scholarships. What would you advise the funders as an approach to training and funding?
Absolutely. So while I've said we need to start from the top, and I believe we do, we also heard the point earlier that all of this starts from the bottom, it starts from education, it starts from access in our society. I think in every training program, there needs to be an active effort to include people with disabilities. And that might involve a little bit more work. That might involve going out there and finding the NGOs and organizations that work with people with disabilities, literally making sure your whole is accessible, that it's accessible for Black people, for example. How are people accessing, how are people hearing about your home? How are people getting the information? Then how is your training accessible? Are you including the deaf community in your training? Are you including the Black community in your training? Are you including neurodiverse? Is it physically accessible? And then it's taking it to the next step, because again, often people go, I'm tired of being developed, I want to work now. I want to be employed, I want to make a living. So are you working towards job opportunities, internships? Are you growing those people through the industry? So there are working professionals, as you say, people with disabilities that are doing wonderful, exceptional things in our industry. Let's support and encourage and develop them and encourage them to telling their stories. But let's also work to make sure that throughout the value chain, and again, if they want to know how to do it, come and ask people, because we can help.
I'll go to Nenio. You've made 5 short movies as strong productions. What was the funding journey with that? Did you find funding somewhere, or was it all through your own efforts?
Yes. One day I sat down and I thought to myself, life of deaf people is hard, man. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. So I decided that I wanted to do a short film. And I started typing a story. Right? I had 0 skills. I just thought about how to do it, and I Googled how to write and send and all that. And I just followed what Google was telling me. Now, luckily, there were people. Luckily there was also a library where I could go and ask how I can continue doing this. So I took a book out and I started reading it, and I started seeing about all the rich people in the world. I actually started reading who are the rich people in the world, and I picked one. I think his name was Gary, I'm not sure about the spelling, G-E-R, Robson, something like that. He's from America. I literally just opened up, think that he's a rich man. And I sent him an email. And I said, please give me money for my movie. And he gave me. It was my first time, it was my first movie. And I was like, wow. He gave me the money, and I did the movie. Thank you. So when it was done, I wrote a report and I gave it and I sent it to him to thank him, to report back on how the movie did. So you know what? I realized, okay, there's an opportunity here. Second movie, I wrote again to somebody who's rich. And I said, can I have money? And they said, no, contact my office. So I contacted the office and I said, okay, I would like to do a second movie, please give me money. And I ended up writing 5 movies. But what does this mean, right? The first one is about, hello, I'm a baby. It's all about love and youthfulness, but then also includes HIV. It also includes, it has an element of HIV, so it's an educational one. And it teaches children about that, right? So it's quite a long book, long story. And then we showed it to the world. We went to, the second one is about, refugee camp. Okay, the fifth one is about the World Refugee Camp. Yeah, so I just showed about what happens. I wanted to show the world what happens in refugee camps and so forth. And then went into the Deaf Wave Film Festival. In America, it was entered in the World Deaf Festival in America in Wisconsin. So I received an email and I read it, and they requested that I showcase the World Refugee Camp, and I said yes, and they congratulated me, and I was extremely proud. But later, I felt like the world change, because before I said I just wrote that, I asked for money, I said yes, but right now it's so difficult. I keep getting no. So now I think the world probably has a lot of credit. Throughout the years, I have made a lot of credit because I've been asking and I've been denied. They don't say yes anymore to me. So I'm hoping that one day again in future, I'll be able to get funding. All you gotta do is ask, man.
Thank you so much, Nenio. Quite an interesting journey. I'm going to turn over to Shakila. Shakila, I know you've done 50 movies and done audio description. Some projects on Netflix, some on SABC, and some from the KZN Film Commission. You didn't write just an email. Your process with finding with that?
But
Yeah, sourcing funding, yeah.
so, I'm going to go a step back and talk about this. That is, first creating awareness around the subject matter and building a business case for it. So in my case, I did a lot of advocacy, working with the CASA code and ensuring that minimum percentages came into place, but that is basically just academic. And then working with our local film commission in KZN, you have to build champions. You have to bring on board people who understand and grasp and value the market. As Harry said, you've got to share facts around what the market is. So sharing facts on the size of the market, this is the blindness sector, is one part of the AD movie market. You've got other beneficiary groups, which may be persons with learning disabilities, cognitive disabilities, and persons with no disabilities. Just children, adults who want to, persons who are second language speakers who want to improve their language skills, are all beneficiaries of AD. So consequently, creating awareness around the market, building a business case, and building champions in the industry that will support you, which is your filmmakers, your commissions, and so forth. Given that awareness, then I started with a call for action. So movie makers came forward and gave me their films, and these were golden classics like Lollipop and that, but they were not prepared to pay for it, right? So they were very happy for me to make their films accessible to blind audiences, but said if we can find the funding, great. Then I motivated with the KZN Film Commission, which was my starting point. And I must say that they came to the party and we got funding. It went through an open process of an RFP, but we got funding and we created audio description each year for approximately 8 films. And it was specifically local films telling local stories, because audio description, you may find it more commonly with USA films or UK films, Western movies, but little or none, no descriptions available for local content, although that's improving now. So yeah, I started that way and gradually started to build up a library of films. I think the most important thing was the app, when the app came into being, because when I developed the app, then the funding started coming my way, because now we moved not only into the space of the film industry, but also to the space of innovation. And the app represented an innovation within this sector, and I started sourcing funding. And that's how I was able to create 50 films, short and long, feature length. So grants, basically.
So the need for a business case,
yes,
and prove it to them. Also,
and a market.
And a market.
And innovation.
And innovation.
Because if you think about it, you could create an audio description and make a film accessible. But then that's one half of the solution. How do you then deliver it? So the delivery is another barrier. So in South Africa and most African, well, all African countries, broadcasters claim they do not have the capability to deliver a description independently to a targeted audience. So if they were to You mentioned that I just did description for SABC. So there, for example, when we screened Sticks and Stones for description, it was open to all in South Africa. So we supported that because we wanted all persons to become aware of it. But you can't do that on an ongoing basis because sighted persons do not want to be faced with having to listen to description every time they follow that show. So consequently, you need a differentiated mechanism to deliver. So now we created an app. So the app is called Describe App. So the app synchronizes description content with cinema, with television, with any monitor to the external device. So what does it mean then? We've addressed the problem that these delivery mechanisms that represented a barrier now are no longer a barrier. In fact, it's such an easy solution. There's no excuse anymore for cinemas not to include AD, for television not to include AD, because this device, this app, now delivers it on your behalf.
So yeah, a business case, and ladies and gentlemen, you can write emails for funding. Okay, Jonas?
Sorry, Simon, I just want to say something as well. So, I have a friend who's deaf and blind at the same time, right? They were born like that. Right? So, firstly, they were born deaf, and as they got older, I think at the age of 44, they became blind as well. So, they're deaf-blind, or deaf and blind. So, one day, I went to visit him and his family, and they were watching TV, and then he asked me what's happening on TV. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, he chose me to explain to him what's happening on TV. Okay, I know it's going to be hard work, but I tried to explain by holding his hands and then doing sign language. So he followed my sign language with his hands. So that was a new creative way. Speaking of, innovation in my regard, because I had learned something new. And also on the topic of audio. Yeah, audio description. I think that, now when I'm watching something and I can explain it in sign language, so kind of like sign language description as well is something that we can start thinking about.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Yes, there's a movie from South Korea, Snow in the Wind, I think, where there's a couple, the husband is deaf-blind, and the woman, the wife has got a physical disability, but I think of short status. So it won on some, like a document that won an award. They were showcasing the lifestyle of these two, how they help each other in the home setup, in terms of like changing a light bulb, where the woman can't reach, but the husband is deaf-blind, and they're trying to work together. So there's a lot of content that can evolve around disability, and you can see a lot of good innovation out of it. Like you saying, it's called tactile, where a deaf-blind person communicates because they touch the palm and they sign on the palm of their hand.
Yes, tactile.
Tactile, yes.
Can I quickly share with you, for example, at ShazaCin, when we started with the audio description company, I thought, if I'm blind and if I can write description working through a sighted person's eyes, why can't other blind persons do it? And in fact, I have a deaf-blind person who hears through hearing aids. If you take off her hearing aids, she can't hear at all. She's totally blind. She is the sound editor. She does the mixing and mastering, and now I'm training her in description. And most of my team are blind. So we've got, even in the audience, a blind person who can write description, who can voice description. So when you start to work in the space of accessibility and you start to think of making film accessible, you're also beginning to empower the talents that you can use within that context. You can start using persons with disabilities, train them to actually do the content development, the content production, all of it.
Yes, and that's the value chain we are talking about. Behind the camera, in front of us, the way you have actors, But you also know that the value chain behind the camera includes wardrobe people, it includes crew members, it includes producers, writers. The gentleman being spoken about is Charlie in the audience here. He can speak 6 languages and is a very good voiceover artist. So guys,
and does sound editing.
Yeah, he does edit sound as well. So yeah, there's a talent for you there. I'm going to just finish off with the challenges that we spoke about and how we can mitigate. For instance, Karen, you're doing your PhD in film study, focusing on autism. Can you tell us about the statistics that exist? And holistically, how do we approach statistics and noting that down so that we can have a database of talent, a database of filmmakers or actors or people who play that with disabilities?
Absolutely. So, again, I'm going to go over and over again. We don't always have the statistics for Africa and for South Africa. In terms of the autistic community in South Africa, there's no reason to assume it's any different from the global norm. There's no reason to assume that. So we know 1 to 2% of the population will be autistic. Most of them in our country, though, are not diagnosed. Particularly in the Black and Kali communities, there are so many people that go underdiagnosed there. To the best of my knowledge, there are 12 child psychiatrists operating in South Africa. That is clearly not enough child psychiatrists. So this is another thing, and so there's the autism that exists. I can also tell you, when I started out, all my lecturers were going, "Oh, let's start talking about the autism representation that already exists." And I was like, "Great, that's easy. There's one film. There's one film, to the best of my knowledge, in which the autistic character is a young boy who dies. Potentially his mother killed him, and everyone is very sympathetic towards her if she did, because shame, what a terrible burden." Now here in autistic South Africa, that's not really the representation that you want to see. So that's definitely something that I'm working to change, and that I see, and I know a few other people are working to change that. Also, there's been big studies. There's a big audience research study that came out last year, which said that 80% of South Africans don't feel like they're being represented in the content that is out there. And a lot of that is disability representation, is LGBT representation. It's important to say, for example, that there's a huge correlation between the transgender and the autistic community. Around 40% of transgender people are autistic, for example. We don't see that. We don't know that. That's not shown to us. And we know the power of representation. I think we talk always about the power of representation. But again, that's stuff which is statistically proven. When Barack Obama was elected, so many of the studies and surveys said people had seen on TV that you could have a black president and it was fine, and that really affected and helped their decision making. They did a whole study looking at organ donation in the US, and they found that viewers of Grey's Anatomy were less likely to donate organs because they didn't trust that the doctors were like serious people because they're too busy having relationships and arguing with each other. And so it's having a direct impact on the real world. If people see representations of autistic people on TV, that's often their first interaction, not just autism, that's often their first interaction with any kind of disability, is what they see on screen. And it's going to affect how they treat people in the real world. They're going to, as you said earlier, so often assume incompetence. They're going to look down on you. They're going to anticipate that at any moment you're going to have a huge temper tantrum and throw yourself on the floor because that's what they're seeing. And so yeah, the statistics that we do have tell us that there's not even 1% of what we need in the way of representation, and that there's an audience that are really asking for it, looking for it. Because if you think about it, there's the people with disabilities, and every single one of those people has a family, has a community, and all of those people are part of those stories that just at the moment just aren't being told. And where they are being told, they're often sidelined, they're often separated out, or as I say, they're often told from a real point of pity and shame, these poor people. And, those are the stories that we need.
Besides the behind and in front of the camera, there's a need for growing, there's an audience that's not being touched. And it all resonates with reasonable accommodation. Shakila, we've spoken.
Sorry, Simon.
Okay.
Can my interpreter just have a 2-minute break for some water? 1 minute? 1 minute. Is that okay?
This is part of reasonable accommodation, guys. Yeah, we need to be sensitive to this as well. Yeah. Thank you, Nenio. So when you talk about reasonable accommodation, when we are growing an audience and targeting a diverse audience, Shakila, we spoke about inclusion screenings, and you've already started that movement. Shakila, with the KZN film, they have a partnership where they show audio-described movies. But they've gone beyond that by using closed captioning, including deaf audiences and as well as mobility challenged individuals. And can you explain more on that in terms of how you grow an audience and encouraging people with disabilities to be part and parcel of audiences?
Okay. So when I started the audio description initiative 12 years back, well, 2012, I started driving it in South Africa. And I first ran training with the first company I started in 2009. In any case, when KZN Film Commission came into being over 10 years ago, I partnered with them at that stage, sensitized the CEO, and she became a champion of inclusion. So they had a private cinema, and they still do today, which accommodates up to 50 persons, a state-of-the-art private cinema. And they allow me to use it once a month. So I screen an audio-described film. I started with international films, and then now screen our local content with description. And I invite blind persons to come along free of charge with a sighted companion, because I realized very early on that blind persons and visually impaired persons themselves had not experienced audio description and were not even aware that they could enjoy a film or any kind of video content independently. And consequently, they avoided going to the cinema and even avoided television and thought the only way to access media is through the radio. So I started the AD Movie Club, and it's grown over the years. It has sustained itself. And over time, I came to realize that this is an incredibly valuable initiative because it was actually creating a consumer market, audience development, but then it became an awareness-raising platform. I started inviting the industry to come along, so movie makers, government representation, and other stakeholders. So they come along and they sit alongside visually impaired persons, and they watch alongside us our AD films, and get to understand exactly how we appreciate a film, how it should be made, what goes into making it, and more importantly, that there is a market for it. And that's how we've been driving it. And if you look at the USA, the UK, today audio description is not driven by regulatory frameworks. It's not the minimum percentages that's making it happen. It's consumer demand. That's what's making it happen. In America, there's only a percentage under 10 for broadcasters to comply with, but there's 60% that broadcasters are producing. That's coming from because it's consumer driven. Similarly in the UK. So we need to do exactly the same in South Africa. People with disabilities themselves need to drive it. Realize that we should not be excluded, that we should be involved. And Simon, later I want to make the point about what inclusion really means, because eventually We are not making the world inclusive for people with disabilities. We're making the world inclusive for everyone. And there's a lesson to be learned from that. And we look to the techno giants to get that lesson. Today, for example, if you look, can I make that point now, quickly? Because if you really want to understand what inclusion is all about and accessibility, you don't have to go far. Look at your mobile phone. It's the most accessible device created ever on this planet. And how did most of those inclusive features come about? They have at the coalface of the design of the phone and the apps that go onto it, they have accessibility teams. And who make up the accessibility teams? It's persons with diverse disabilities. So if a deaf person needs to hear the phone, what do they need to experience? Vibration. If a blind person needs to use the phone, what do they need to experience? The screen needs to talk. So you got voice over on the phone. If a mobile or physically a person with limited mobility needs to charge their phone and can't reach a plug point, what do they need? They need a charger that's like a saucer. So as you develop features that create accessibility for people with disabilities, you're benefiting everyone. And so inclusion eventually is not about disabled people, it's not about women, it's not about people that look different in terms of race and color. It's all about the end user experience. And if you reduce humanity to the end user experience and want to know how does my end user utilize my product, my service, how can I best enhance the experience? Then you'll know what the need is, you'll know how to design your product, and then you've achieved inclusion. And then you benefit everybody. And that's the business case.
Yeah, universal design approach. So basically, that's
beyond that.
Yes. If you have producers or filmmakers asking, where do we get people with disabilities? But you find these organizations that focus on particular disabilities. There's schools for learners with disabilities. Most universities have got disability units with a large population of students that can be found, but we're not targeting that for some reasons. I need to wrap up because we need about 5 minutes of question and answer. Just one takeaway point or a call out to action that you need producers, filmmakers, or funding bodies to know. Nenio, quickly.
Okay, so what advice would I give? I would say to the world, okay? If you hear nothing, you will know nothing. So, like I said, if a deaf producer could just write a letter and ask for funding, you know, but they don't know how to explain it well, the funder won't understand it well and just throw that application away. So it's important that you understand the different disabilities, be able to explain deafness, blindness, wheelchair users, be able to give the funder that clear description so that they understand what you're talking about and how it is possible for the different disabilities to achieve what they want to achieve through the funding.
Thank you, Nenio. Karen.
My quick takeaways would be presume competence and presume similarity. You know, I think it's easy to focus on disabilities with what's different about us, but we have so much more in common as human beings. So our stories, our wants, our desires are all the same. So I think that should be the starting point of any content that includes people with disabilities in any events and conversations is assume that we all want the same things and assume that we're capable.
Shakila.
So you said there's sources, so there's databases that people use, but my experience has been is in the implementation. So you may go and you may know where you can find people with disabilities to include in your organization, but then the process you use to go and find them excludes their inclusion. So you never find them, and then you use that as a self-fulfilling prophecy. They don't exist. So what I'm going to say is that you've got to, we're not a problem. You tend to look at us as a problem and you avoid us. Rather see us as the solution. Go to persons with disabilities and ask them, how best can we find you and where are you? And we'll show you exactly where we are.
Ladies and gentlemen, as simple as that. Any questions? Any contributions? Maybe a point that you want to add? Just to, yes, sir.
This is more common in general. I've got bipolar disorder, ADHD, and Jeynes. And I remember the film Silver Linings Playbook. And the first time seeing someone that's, I'm being told, has the same similar condition as me, in that case being bipolar, and then seeing, wait, this is similar to what I go through. And it hurts when you see programming that tries to be inclusive, but they miss the point entirely. And I do hope going further into the future that's going to become something that happens less and less.
I think that's a very important point, because I think that bad depictions and bad representation is actively harmful. The big example was there was a film brought out called Music, which portrayed a restraints technique used on an autistic child, which the autistic community believe is completely harmful and abusive and can lead to injuries. But in the movie, it was shown as this is the right thing to do. The therapist that was working with her was the person doing it. And so anyone watching that film, an innocent audience member who doesn't know any better, is going to go, oh, that's what I should be doing in this situation. So absolutely, harmful portrayals and incorrect portrayals, or portrayals that try to fix disability, are very dangerous. So thank you for that point.
Yeah. Thank you for that comment, because you find that in Shaka 11, the character with the disability is still portrayed as the evil character. And as much as there's inclusion, the stereotypes still exist. So that also needs to be addressed. Yes, there's participation and inclusion, but in a different way. Ma'am, then after more? Yeah.
Okay. My name is Adele from Benchmark Media, subtitle and video description company. You've done amazing work, Shakila, in terms of the development of the app for audio description. What is the next step in making this more accessible to the greater audience in South Africa and getting broadcasters to make use of the app or programming so that the app can be applied by visually impaired viewers?
That has been somewhat challenging in South Africa, but that is work in progress, approaching our various broadcasters to accept the app, and it's actually a cost-free solution to them, right? It's enabling us to then develop the description content, stimulate an industry, because the whole idea is if we start broadcasting description via the app, we would stimulate an industry within South Africa and Africa where we would start seeing audio description companies mushrooming up around the continent, creating description content. So that's work in progress, unfortunately, and I haven't got very far, but I hope to. And one of my reasons in being at festivals like this is to create sensitivity around it and to partner with the commission to help this process. Yeah, but for now the app is available on the Google Play Store. You can download it for free. It's available for free, and for iPhone users, it's on a link, and it's open globally. And ironically, India has adopted it and using it. It was actually legislated in a judgment in court in India to use the app as a description, as an accessibility solution. In Ireland, they are beginning to adapt it, but yet my own country is still getting there.
Congratulations, Shakila.
Thank you.
No, thank you very much. I think first we need to appreciate the work that Simon, Shakila, and everyone is doing in this space. My name is Mo from KZN Film. Every time I sit in these sessions, I realize how much I don't know. And I just think we need to do a little bit more in terms of getting, let me say, representativity in decision making. Because you made me an example of Ushaka, Ilembe. I think intentions were good, but I'm not sure if there was a person who was closer to understanding of the sector who was advising and be able to pick up those things. It's not only that. I mean, we spoke earlier on here around issues around funding as well. You know, when someone submits a film, whether it's coming for development, then it's going to move to production and all that, they are advising committees that advises in terms of approval and whatnot. They look at all other technical elements, and this is always left out. There's just not even a question posed to say, okay, great film, all is good, but how accessible is it? I mean, so I'm just thinking that we do need to think about different committees that make decisions to ensure that there's just this representativity, or somewhat it's brought in, that it becomes part of the discussion before the decision is actually made. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
I would like to say, so I'm currently sitting on the Technical Advisory Committee for KZN Film Commission for many years. I've been working as an evaluator. I'm also working with the PSP as an evaluator. And I am being offered that voice just because I happen to be there. I'm there because I'm a professional writer and producer and director. But I'm so often the only one raising my hand going, hang on a second, there's already warring representation or bad stereotypes happening here. And I think there's, even in the case of the PSP, there's a requirement around disability. But what they're doing is they're ticking a box to say, oh, there's 3 crew members. Okay, great, we've done our job. But they're not looking at the stories and the characters and the actors. None of that is being looked at. So absolutely, that needs to be really embedded into the process. And I also have had some conversations around our licensing boards and our ratings and our warnings. We need to look at the ways in which people are being represented.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending our session. I hope Nenio, Karen, and Shakila managed to, just to talk and articulate on some of the pointers. We are available for the next few minutes to interact and engage with you. We welcome partnerships, proposals, and ways to move forward. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Yes.